Jason Nutt, Director of Transportation and Public Works, leading the presentation.
Good afternoon, Mayor Corsi and council members. I'm Jason Nutt. I'm the Director of Transportation and Public Works. I am the front guy today talking about the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program. In the audience are representatives from just about every one of the departments that has a grant incorporated or a grant application that they're requesting. And so if, as we get through the process or to the end of the process, you have detailed questions that I can't answer about them, I'll be inviting someone to come down and provide a more detailed level of response. So the goal of this is to apply for Hazard Mitigation Grant Program. This is a FEMA-funded project or a FEMA-funded program that is identified following the proclamation of a federal disaster, and this is a program that's specifically identified for providing benefits to improving loss of life, looking at lessening the impact of a specific disaster, trying to mitigate consequences of different types of disasters that can come to and affect a community. And it's administered through the the California Office of Emergency Services. It is, sorry, excuse me for a second. So when a disaster is declared, it doesn't matter where the disaster in California. If it's presidential disaster, any entity within the state can submit an application to receive funds to improve the situation for a community. And in this particular case, we have two possible opportunities. They relate to the fires in Northern California and Southern California. That's what we're looking to do today. We went through an initial evaluation period back in the beginning of the calendar year where staff from different departments identified over 30 projects. Those projects ranged all over the board in different types of mitigation methods that we may want to implement through the course of this process to mitigate different types of disasters.
I would like to add for council that what this works off of, because of the condensed time frames associated with it, is your already existing mitigation plans. So the expectation is your mitigation plan has been developed to a point that you can capitalize on these grant opportunities. So it's not stuff that hasn't been already vetted through some process. There's some stragglers in that conversation, but mostly this is meant to capitalize on your existing mitigation plans that you've adopted.
Yeah, so our agency has developed a local hazard mitigation plan. We did utilize that as a base document to identify the initial project scopes. We did expand on that because of the nature of the disasters that came forward and the type of evaluation process that we went through. Ultimately, what happened is we vetted a series of projects. We worked with our consultant, Ernst & Young. We took the 30 projects that the staff had come up with. We bounced these ideas off of state representatives. Ultimately, what came back was 9 projects, made it through the initial screening. We have notice of intents that we've developed for those, and those have all been approved. Those 9 projects are broken up into 3 projects that the utilities and Santa Rosa Water have prepared. Those have been taken to the Board of Public Utilities on the 2nd and were approved to move forward. There are 6 projects that are general fund in nature, and that's really what we're here to discuss today, are the general fund projects. I do have representatives from Water here that can answer questions more detailed about the 3 that they've put forward if you have those questions. Of those 6 projects, we did already submit 2 applications. We have the opportunity, if council does not approve those applications, to pull them back. The reason we did that, each of the releases of funds for hazard mitigation grant programs, there's dedicated pots of money for each of those. And rather than putting all of our projects into one release where they're all competing against each other, we did our best to try to separate projects that were ready for the July release, and we went ahead and pushed those forward for consideration. That does not supersede your authority to tell us otherwise, but we did that on behalf of the organization trying to maximize the benefit that we could receive through the 2 different releases. The second release is the September 4th, and that's the one that's coming up. That's what our intent is to try to get your feedback and approvals, and then we submit the remaining items or the remaining projects for that release. Here are the 9 projects that we're looking at. I'm going to do my best to try to give you a very brief update on a description of those projects. Project 275 is the public safety public safety backup generator. We determined during the facilities assessment and as a function of this and other events that the backup generator is not properly functioning. We have made attempts to work around it with some portable generators in order to make this work. But we did determine that repairing this and making a permanent improvement is something that's important.
We would like to not MacGyver our situation through that first one.
We did find that when we MacGyvered it the first time, well, we had some difficulties with some of the lights that sort of blew up because we put too much energy into the system, and that was something that we're trying to look at the age of the building. We're trying to look at the facility, what it should be accepting, what it can, and so this is one of the challenges that we ran into, was the pieces weren't connecting up properly. So we would like, and that's what this application is for, is to do a proper reconstruction and put in a piece of equipment that's appropriate for that facility. Project 167 is backup generators for water and wastewater facilities. This project will replace 3 existing substandard diesel generators and 19 existing propane or natural gas emergency generators with more reliable diesel generators at the 22 critical wastewater facilities. What they ended up finding out is during this particular disaster, it was extremely difficult to get propane up to these locations. Diesel is much more readily available. It's an easier product to work with. And that's why Santa Rosa Water is looking at converting these into something that's a little easier for them to manage in disasters.
Are these primarily pump stations?
These are water and sewer lift stations.
Lift stations.
It does also include the sub-regional system leading to the geysers. Those are also a part of this program as well. Just to make sure I didn't misstate. Well, he's not getting up that fast, so I'll move on. Projects 286 are dam inundation flood maps. We own a series of dams in this city, and in particular, the Recreation and Parks Department is the responsible entity for that. Those dam inundation maps are related to technical studies that are done to determine whether poor maintenance or failure from a natural disaster would result in inundation into low-lying areas immediately adjacent, and what the resulting damage is associated with that. And the current maps that we have are dated 1970. Those maps need to be updated in order to comply with state standards that went into effect July 1st, 2017. And so this is an area that we've been looking at for the last year, trying to figure out how we were going to accomplish this. With the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program, it seemed like an appropriate fit for that specific request. Project 196 is the seismic and water supply improvements to 3 steel reservoirs. This project will correct seismic deficiencies at 3 welded steel reservoirs to ensure there is sufficient water available in the tanks for firefighting and drinking water purposes. There are structural deficiencies within these in different forms, and we feel that this is, again, an appropriate and reasonable ask to have, albeit we are continuing to work on identifying the most appropriate approach to completing this task, we think hazard mitigation will help us finance and make that one come to fruition quicker. Project 158 is a traffic signal retrofit, including battery backups. This project will install battery backups at traffic signals throughout the city to help facilitate evacuation efforts. It will also allow traffic flow to continue operating during the course of a power outage. The battery backups can typically last between 4 and 6 hours. They are also somewhat portable. I say somewhat, they are bulky. They're a little challenging to disconnect. You pick them up, you move them to another one. If there's a more critical intersection that you want to keep running for a longer period of time. During the event in October, we did have a number of signals that went dark, made it more challenging for public safety officials to help folks evacuate out of those communities. This would help us not deploy resources at locations where we don't have to. And so it would help us get resources where they're most desperately needed. Project 249 is the water treatment plant facility flooding mitigation. This project will create a flood wall, about a 6,500 lineal foot berm wall and gates around the facility at the regional treatment plant. It's in an effort to save and sustain operations there and keep from having significant damage to critical facilities and infrastructure.
So, Director, really fast, that one sticks out like a sore thumb to me, not just because of the total cost, but every other project that's on this list, the local share is either 25% or I think one is 12.5%. This one's local share is 60% of the total cost. Can you talk a little bit about how this project was selected?
So I'll talk about the local match component while my counterparts from water come down. The hazard mitigation program has a maximum of $5 million of granted funds. And so the local match for this particular project would be higher simply because the local match or the amount provided to the local agency is capped.
This project addresses a very long-standing vulnerability we have at the Laguna Treatment Plant. We do have a history of floods. We've put in, over the last few years, a temporary, very small wall to protect the most essential equipment. This project is already in the CIP, so this grant would just be offsetting the maximum amount, which is $5 million, and provide, obviously, a significant benefit and allow the project to move forward in a more financially advantageous way.
Project 116 is my apologies. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. The nerves keeps me moving. So Project 116 is a CHIPPER program. This program is intended to provide education as well as physical work to help property owners manage their properties better in the wildland urban interface in an effort to try to reduce fuel loadings in and around those areas. The wildfire early detection and notification options. This is a project that I'm going to ask the chief to come down and talk about in more detail once I finish this portion of the presentation so that he can give you a little more information about what notifications mean. In this particular case, I have it listed as a Project 287. Project 287 is actually something very specific relating to Sirens, and we are going to not submit that for the September 4th, and Tony will go into more detail about how we want to coordinate and work with the county in an effort to come up with a comprehensive plan on that.
So before we go too much further, that conversation will be brought forward in a second, but I want to remind council that there are additional opportunities. There's an October time period, and then there will be an additional opportunity that has not been scheduled yet because there is an additional fires ongoing in a presidential disaster. So there are multiple opportunities for us to be continuing through this process to submit a hazard mitigation grants. Unfortunately, these things do trail the disaster. FEMA is advocating for a more proactive approach that would have investments come in advance of disasters instead of response to disasters, because they do also understand the struggle and the pressures this puts on local communities to just be responding to these situations. But I don't want to make it seem like there are not going to be additional opportunities to direct requests to our mitigation experts. There's one in October, and then there'll be one after that in response to the current fires.
So what we've done instead of discussing Sirens at this specific project is we've been working with the county on a camera program, and what you see on here and what you read in the description of the staff report specifically relates to the coordination efforts that the city fire department is having with various entities at the county in an effort to deploy cameras as an early detection system. And so the local match that you see there would be our share of the local match. That's why it looks, again, different from some of the others as far as not being 25%. It's actually half of that 25%. And that would be our share of participating in their application that is ready to go. And then Tony will come down and talk more about the other components of that. The last item that we have here is Project 290, which is the storm drain master plan. One of the things that we don't have in this community is a comprehensive evaluation of our storm drain system. We don't know where the weaknesses are. We do know from past history that flooding does occur. It does exist in town, but we don't have a clean, clear way of tracking exactly where those things are. A storm drain master plan will tell us as an infrastructure component where our deficiencies are and how we might need to address those deficiencies moving forward into the future. And so this is a critical component that we have as part of our storm drain community or our storm drain team, and trying to get them to better understand what our infrastructure really looks like. So with that, I'd like Tony to come down and talk about the Siren or the interaction with the county.
Ms. Combs?
But before you go to talk in more detail about any one of them, I can't make the numbers add to the number at the bottom for our total approved projects local share. And I just wonder if somebody can double check that. It's possible it has to do with rounding, but I can't get the last three digits. And I haven't done the whole set of numbers. I just was sitting here adding up the numbers and couldn't make them work. So if somebody can check the numbers, I'd appreciate it. It's probably rounding, but to get three digits wrong makes me nervous. So if somebody could have a quick look. Thanks.
This one's right. I will confirm. I will confirm it.
I'm really not playing gotcha. I was just sitting here adding numbers.
I will say there was a very last minute change in this. That was the Project 287, and I'm going to apologize up front. There are numbers that are incorrect here, and I'm going to describe those in detail. If you look at Attachment A does have it's basically this table. It should have the actual numbers. I apologize if I didn't get that total all squared away.
Hello. Hey, Tony Gosner, Fire Chief for the City of Santa Rosa. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the wildfire early detection and notification options. There's a lot of work that's going on with the county and the surrounding areas regarding emergency alerting, as well as options. How are we going to notify the community aside from phone calls and internet options, so to speak. So one of the things that we commonly hear is the questions about sirens. And for us, Sirens really, we're going to look at them. We're going to have a community meeting, a few community meetings, 4 or 5 in September. And we're going to go through a process of what we're looking for in a early detection system. I will tell you right off the bat that Sirens, I'm not a big fan of them. They were designed in the 40s. You know, they were air raid sirens. So when you're outside, you hear the siren, you get inside. With today's houses, they're built so tight, you'd have to have so many sirens around the city for people to hear them in the middle of the night. It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense right now. I will say that where sirens do make a huge impact is at like a tsunami warning, where it's a single purpose. You hear the siren go off, you know exactly what to do. You go to high ground. And we just don't have that in our urban areas. So we have some volunteer departments that still utilize sirens. They don't go off for the 3 minutes. They go off for a few cycles and they shut down. So sirens to us are a little problematic in public education moving forward. Where we really think we're going to have great success is with the camera system. So the Sonoma County Water Agency has 8 cameras that they're going to put up. In fact, we have 2 meetings tomorrow. One's on emergency alert systems. Talk about Nixle, SoCo Alert, WIA, and EAS. And then in the afternoon, we have a presentation on the wildfire camera systems. What the wildfire camera systems do, they give us a large view of Sonoma County. So when a call comes in, dispatchers, I was up there last Friday for a call in Petaluma. Went in to go make sure everyone was doing all right, making sure all the resources were moving where they need to move. And they had a big TV up there with 2 cameras on. And the 2 cameras were shining towards or showing towards Lake County, and you could see the 2 columns, one from the river fire, one from the ranch fire. So that was one camera shining towards Lake County. We had another camera shining towards southern Sonoma County, but it wasn't angled enough to see the fire in Petaluma. So right now, CAL FIRE has, St. Helena specifically, the dispatch center has the ability to move those cameras around so we can pan the camera to certain areas. And we actually called them that day to see if they can pan that camera over. They weren't able to, but we are going to have access to do that in our dispatch centers shortly. And we're going to have access to at least 8 cameras just for Sonoma County. In addition, working with PG&E and other players, there's going to be multiple cameras placed throughout the county that we'll have access to, and we'll be able to steer the cameras where we need to. So when a call comes in for a wildland fire, we know the area. We can take a look at the TV. There's I see smoke. I don't see smoke. It's growing fast. It's moving fast. You know, it'll give us some opportunity to know what's going on, and that will allow us to alert those citizens in that area at a much faster rate and with the situational awareness that we just did not have back in October. So we really feel that's where the value is. That'll work for wintertime storms, summer, and anyone can get into it. So you can be at home and log into it and look at the cameras. It's kind of like the cameras at Tahoe. Is it snowing? Let me punch in here. Oh, yeah, it is snowing. So it gives the community something to access when they need to. It also gives the dispatchers the ability to look at certain areas of the county when there is a reported fire, and that gives us a lot of times we'll be responding to the fire, we won't see smoke. Dispatchers can tell us, no, we have a column of smoke and this is where it is, or we don't see smoke either, so we can adjust our response accordingly. I will say last 2 days ago, there was 2 reported vegetation fires that turned out to be dust. So those are something that we can, right? People are disking their fields, and one was a leaf blower, believe it or not, but it was kicking up a lot of dust, enough to where people that live on Fountain Grove were calling it in. It was in the Mark West Springs area. So we had 2 calls like that in the last few days, and this will give us the ability to be able to look and monitor and say, yes, there is smoke, it is building, or we saw something, but it's gone, and they'll be able to triangulate and figure out exactly where where that is. So that's the way we're heading right now at this point.
So,
Chief, if I can just interrupt for a second. You talked about being up there and seeing the screens. Where's up there?
Oh, I'm sorry. I was at the Redcom Dispatch Center.
Okay. So Redcom is monitoring these cameras now?
Redcom has a TV dedicated to these 2 cameras right now. There's only 2 up and running. There's going to be up to 8 for Sonoma County through the one program, but there's going to be multiple other cameras that we'll have access to once we get the system up and running.
So I want to make clear of a couple things that are going on right now. What staff has been able to identify is one of the challenges that happened in the fire last October was situational awareness. Without situational awareness, it's hard to deploy resources against those resources where you need to have them and that includes evacuations, fighting fires, and would actually be a conversation even in different types of disaster situations. I have traveled down to see San Diego and see the ability that San Diego Gas and Electric is affording the county of San Diego and being able to support those types of endeavors through a robust camera system. We are not walking away from the conversation about other types of alerting options, which include sirens, could include conversations about individual radios, supplying people that have landline conversations. We're looking at all of those things. There are challenges with those items, and there's frankly a coordination effort that has to be associated with the other jurisdictions because sound does not stop at one jurisdictional boundary or another. We're going to go into some conversations through our neighborhood resiliency initiative into a variety of communities. That work's being planned right now to do several things. First of all, provide a robust education experience around the alerting systems that are available to folks. We will actually staff this to have the ability for people to enroll on the spot. We're pursuing maybe even having some baseline material for people to take back to their homes to make themselves more resilient in their home at that moment. We will also be going through some of these scenarios and trying to better understand what the community is expecting and what they need from us as protectors of this community. So we will be listening. We will also be evaluating that with our subject matter experts from Ernst & Young because they have experienced siren systems that quickly degraded. In fact, the capital area of D.C. after 9/11 built up a siren system that was never used, is now no longer functional. We need more time to get into those conversations because they do require those interagency coordinating efforts. What we will then do is bring back a program in the next phase in the October period for council to consider for funding. So I don't want to make it sound like that this is just one choice, but the immediate choice and the one that staff can understand the value of and is being worked on as a coordinated effort is in the camera area. But the commitment is starting in September, we're going to get into a conversation with our community exactly about this issue. So that's the plan. More to come on that plan, but this should not be interpreted as walking away from one thing or another. We've got to go through an evaluative process on these things and really understand what these tools are and how they might benefit the community.
Yeah, and with that, I'll just add, we're working with the county on that too. The county does have certain areas that they'd like to use sirens. One of them is Fish Mountain. It's a mountain with brush and trees, one way in, one way out. So a siren might make sense for that community. We may have some of those areas bordering Santa Rosa that we might want to employ. The problem with sirens is when it's really windy, sound doesn't carry like it does on a nice sunny day, right? So there's a lot of limitations. There's some studies that we're looking at, but we're not discounting, like the city manager said, we're going to look at everything, but we want to make sure that whatever we use is going to be easy to maintain and give us the best situational awareness so we can alert the community as quick as we can.
Thank you. Mr. Tibbetts.
Thank you, Mayor. This sounds good. I was one of the big fans of sirens. I think a lot of us were because we were kind of hearing from the community after the fire that this seemed like a no-brainer, and what I'm hearing you say makes a lot of sense. The winds sound carrying appropriately through housing. But one of the questions I still have that I didn't hear get addressed, and if you did, I apologize, and that is that I think one of the appeals to Sirens was the concept of itself as a technology being resilient, of having redundant power systems that in the event of an earthquake, a nearby fire, could still be activated. How would these cameras be resilient, if you will, in the same way that a siren potentially could be? That's one question. The second question would be, is cameras are great, but really it depends on the operator to make the call, right? That was one of the problems with our fire, is that we knew it was coming, but somebody somewhere decided that we needed to let the situation potentially evolve before taking action. How is this camera system going to be or not be vulnerable to those Achilles heels, if you will?
Well, I'll speak to the last first, and so there's always going to be human, decision making for these systems. What we didn't have in October was a camera system. So what we had was hearsay. We heard some radio traffic on different radio channels, but it was never corroborated. I myself went on Fountain Grove. I said, I see a little glow way out there. It's a long ways away. And that was at 11:30, 11:45 at night. And we know it came into town at 1 o'clock. So there was really, unless you post somebody up there just watching it march at you, and everyone's too busy to do that. With the camera systems, it's in the dispatch center. Dispatch will be able to monitor that as well. Any dispatch center can, Sonoma County Sheriffs can do it. Santa Rosa PD can look at it. So if there's anything on the outskirts, they can log right in and take a look. And we will have access to the controls of those cameras, so we're not calling somebody to do it. It's brand new, so we're just, they're testing it out. There's certain logins and safeties that we have to employ right now. So, that's going to give us the best bang for our buck, in my opinion. As far as resiliency, with the cameras as well as the sirens, everything runs on electricity. So if we say PG&E degenerizes the system, there's got to be some sort of a battery backup. It's not going to be forever. I believe Jason talked about a backup that was going to last 4 to 6 hours for a traffic light. I would assume something similar to these, but again, these are so new, and I apologize, we weren't involved in the creation of this. This was, by the way, we're doing this, come learn, and we're going to learn together. Tomorrow at 1 o'clock, that's what we're doing as part of the larger program. So I will know more of these answers as we move forward, but that's on everyone's mind. What happens if the power goes down? What happens if the internet goes down? What happens if, right? So there's always the what ifs. So we're trying to take a look at all of those, and we can't solve everything. I can't sit here and guarantee you that it'll always work. But what I can say is that the camera systems that are being used in the Tahoe area have been very good and very resilient.
Thanks. So one follow-up question I have, you mentioned that it's going to go to dispatch. Does that mean that we will have the decision-making power to issue an evacuation notice over people in the city of Santa Rosa? Because I know that was also a criticism, I think, of the city due to a confusion about whose responsibility it is to notify. Am I making sense?
A little bit.
Okay, so
Yeah.
What I'm driving at is, will the county hold the authority to make the evacuation calls?
We
We
hold the authority for the city of Santa Rosa. Now, if we're super busy, we might ask them to do it. My goal is to make sure that when we do evacuations, it resides in our primary dispatch centers. For the city of Santa Rosa, it's Santa Rosa Police Department. For the larger Sonoma County, it's Sonoma County Sheriff's Department. Redcom is called a secondary dispatch. So all those calls we get go through one of either Santa Rosa or Sonoma County or Petaluma or Sebastopol PD before they come to the fire side, right? So, but what we really need to focus on is when we issue evacuation, it'll go out through our center, and we're working with police right now on that, and we have control of that, just like the county will have control of the county. There has to be some linkage We have to communicate and coordinate because you got two different systems doing it. One of the things we had that night, we had SoCo alert and Nixle. People were confused, and I get that, but there's got to be coordination. Part of it is the education that we have to pump out to the residents of Santa Rosa and the county.
So continuing on what the chief was saying, so one of the real challenges in evacuation is the system that's currently utilized, and I saw it once again being deployed in Reading, is a radius system in a lot of the state, which means, one of the real challenges is when you've divided up in a radius system, how people get caught up in a radius system. What San Diego County does, and I'm not saying it's a foolproof system, no system is relies on a grid system, but that took many years to develop. I think we can capitalize on the work that they've developed there, but a grid system means you're pointing to grids in a map which may actually fit more into compartments that reflect where your city boundaries are and actually reflect geographical locations. When you lay out a circular radius, people get caught up in that radius that may be on the other side of a mountain, on the other side of a other type of barrier, but they get caught up in these issues, and then that's what sort of degrades the ability to form and puts pressure on staff to make evacuation calls that are based upon a radius mentality. So I would say that's why this is so much more this is an example of where all these things interplay and make these very, very complicated conversations. And the key to this is to move to as the chief said, I would strike the word some interoperability. We need an interoperable system that works. We have to work together, and we have to make sure that we're all using the same terminology. I was down in the aftermath of what had happened in Ventura County and Santa Barbara County, and those two counties can't agree on evacuation terminology, meaning that if you're sitting on the border of a county there, one side you're getting information from two different sources using two different terminologies. We have to change that. That's the essential thing that gets us into a rational way to deal with these issues, where we're using one terminology, where we're using a standard approach, and it takes into consideration. That is not going to appear overnight. That takes years to build. Part of what we're going through right now in this mitigation process is trying to build some of these systems of interoperability so that we can make this a much, much safer place. We have a leg up as it relates to fire. Some of the council, the recovery and rebuild, are going down with 2 supervisors at the end of the month to actually see this system, because this system actually is something I believe that both the city and the county and the other cities in this county, I can't emphasize that enough, need to participate in and need to get aligned with. I mean, a grid system sounds like it's easy, but it's going to require all the public safety divisions to default to the same management plan. And I'm sure the former chief will tell you that that's going to be its own lift in itself, but that's where we have to go as a community.
Ms. Combs.
Thank you. Obviously, nobody in this room wants a system that doesn't work. That's the bottom line. I am hopeful that whatever system we select doesn't require opting in. And I want to make sure that we have that in mind. My other concern is to make sure that we have a robust public engagement process. And I'm not talking about public education. I'm talking about a public engagement process. With the extent of the conversation that we've just had, and with some of the opinions that have already been reflected, it has a little bit of a feeling that sort of the experts have already decided, and this is what we're going to do. And I appreciate that we have subject matter experts to call on. I certainly support wildfire early detection and situational awareness. I don't have any problem with the camera system. I want our public to feel, particularly now, that they can sleep safely at night, and that they will wake up if they need to by an emergency notification. And for me, that's the bottom line. I won't say what the notification has to be, but people need to be able to sleep at night believing that they'll be notified. I myself have a lot of personal experience with disasters. I've been through, 8 or 9 tornadoes, at least 2 hurricanes where the roof of the adjacent apartment building was torn off. Mine, for some unusual reason, wasn't, but all the others in my complex were. I lived within 10 miles of 3 Mile Island when that nuclear disaster happened. I'm only listing a few. I somehow have had a lot of experience living as a resident in disasters. It was really helpful when 3 Mile Island was happening that the fire station had a signal alarm, and that I heard this siren that we didn't normally hear and turned the radio on. That was helpful for me in informing my evacuation. I'm not requiring a siren, but I know that my own phone at home, I have, in addition to good cell phone service, a landline. It doesn't ring. Nixle doesn't serve it. There isn't really a mechanism for Nixle to send my landline a text message. So I'm trying to figure out what's going to wake me up, because a text message isn't going to wake me up either. So whatever we do, we need a robust public engagement process, and we need to be able to tell our residents that they can sleep at night and they will be woken if they need to be. So that's my bottom line. And I look forward to how we solve that going forward. Thanks.
Right. I hear you. I couldn't agree more. I will tell you that Sonoma County used the WIA system on the pallet fire and the fire in Sonoma about a month and a half ago. And they choked it down to a small area, and they sent out the alert. And afterwards, it's like, all right, who got it? Start making some phone calls, make sure people received it. People on AT&T got it, people on Verizon didn't. And it was a function, or I might have that backwards, but one or the other didn't get it. And it was a function of where you drew the circle and what cell towers were in that circle. So it's a very complex issue that we're trying to parse through. And I will tell you, Nixle, that's part of our problem. There's confusion over Nixle, SoCo Alert, WIA, EAS. Nixle is an informational system that people sign up to get information from largely law enforcement on multiple items. Some departments use it as a community engagement, and others just simply give information when it's needed.
Sometimes it's hard when what it gives me is that Santa is flying by.
Right.
It's like, wait a minute, I'm alerting to this because it's too close to a fire for that.
So while Nixle was used a lot in October, that's really, and it worked for the people that were on Nixle. We need to make sure people sign up for SoCo Alert, which is opt-in. But also, we're going to use the county has already said, we are going to use the wireless emergency system, and we're going to use EAS. So EAS is the Amber system. If you have
Is that comparable to reverse 911?
Yes. SoCo Alert is also comparable to, so if you have a landline, it should work already, but you got to sign up for your your cell phone.
The opt-in piece concerns me.
Right.
But we don't need to solve it today. I just want to make sure we have a robust engagement.
I guess my point is we're going to use everything. We're not going to use one or the other. We're using all of it.
And this may lead to some additional conversations. The mayor and I and the chief and I sat in a conversation with the FCC shortly after the event, and we can say that, at least from my perspective, and I'm sure the 2 other gentlemen would concur, that was a less than satisfactory conversation about the FCC's potential role in making sure that this interoperability between private providers is there. But that's going to be a lift that we're going to have to make on a national level, and our allies are aware of that conversation. But there is going to have to be those types of conversations about interoperability as we go through this process.
Mr. Schwedhelm.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, Chief, for this information. Just that interoperability. So Sonoma Water has purchased the 8 cameras. You know, I've seen them and they're great. Have they committed to actually integrating with what we may do if we do them and the county?
Yes, they have. Everyone, we all have to work together. There's just
No,
right?
I get that. Have they said that out loud, or is it in writing somewhere?
Well, I've heard it aloud. I've not seen it in writing.
Thank you.
But it is allowed.
Okay. And then, so with this program, this is just the city of Santa Rosa, correct? We're competing for, just with this one, Project 287.
In conjunction with the county. It's to tie in with the county as well.
So that's my question is, are we competing against them or are we individual?
So this particular, so what it is we're working with them. The request that we're asking a council for that specific item is to allocate funds so that we can participate with their application. So it's one application that the county will be submitting. We would be a partner with them on that application.
And do they have similar dollar amounts that we do?
Yes. So what 25% is the local match, and we would be splitting that local match with the county, and an appropriate number of cameras would be located within an area that would benefit the city.
That was my next question, but we don't know what that appropriate number is. I guess one of the struggles is, and I love doing this collaboration, we're 43 square miles. How many hundreds of square miles is the county responsible for? And a 50-50 split may not seem like, is that the most equitable way of doing it?
Well, I think this is an evolving conversation. We want to show the commitment to that, but that is our underlying thesis, is that we're going to be doing this in a way that benefits our citizens. That's where our share is coming from.
Great. And then the other question I have is about the safety of the cameras. Just like when we relocated the fire station, we got the temporary one for $1, but then there's $1 million to do all the infrastructure. Where would these be located? I mean, it sounds funny. Are they going to put them on a tallest tree so you get the best view, which then makes them susceptible to being, if the tree burns? Are there additional costs for actually the infrastructure to mount the cameras, or is it included in these dollar figures, or might you have to come back to us to fund the actual structure to mount the cameras?
We'll bring Neil in. He's the other expert.
No pressure, Neil.
Hi. So just to back up a little bit, there's essentially 3 phases of cameras. There's the water agency one that's going in now. There's PG&E, and then there's the ones that would come under this project, which essentially by the end of when all the cameras got installed would look at a huge amount of not only the county of Sonoma, but the areas in wildland in other counties that would come in. So if the fire were coming in from somewhere else, it would give us the ability. Within this project, you're looking at infrastructure included for essentially 10 cameras that would be part of this system. What I've been, when I sit with the county, advocating for is that our $250,000 would go for cameras in locations like up in Sky Farm, in areas that benefit the city on where they look out on. And yeah, what you're seeing represented there as far as our local match is the cost of the camera. You have to do something called backhaul on data. So in other words, microwave, so it can send the pictures to dispatch to see, making sure that there's power and backup power for all of it. So within the price tag you're seeing there, we're joining in on 10 cameras. Probably 3 to 4 of those would be locations, and not necessarily within the city, but protecting the city in the areas they look at.
Okay. And one of the reasons why I bring this up, you all probably remember when the fire was heading towards Mount San Helena, and there's some key communication towers, and if the fire reached it, that was going to create a whole other bunch of problems. So I'm just wondering what we can do to ensure that the camera is safe and secure and is going to continue to do what we're paying for it to do. I know there's a lot of unknowns.
So what I would say is the lesson that we've heard continually is infrastructure is going to at some point fail. So what you're trying to do is position these the best place to make yourself situational awareness, take into account what your concern concerns are, and I think that's what the teams are, that they're in the safest, most robust location that we can place them. So they might be on another piece of infrastructure that's more protected than if they were up on a tall tree. Those things are taken into consideration. But at the end of the day, the value-added proposition is for evacuations and saving life and property. And if we lose a camera in the endeavor of doing that, I think that that is what we're trying to do, is to try to create that most protected. But that is, protecting the asset is part of the conversation as well.
And the benefit here is that this is with the number of cameras and sort of, they will kind of Venn diagram over an area. You have redundant cameras viewing an area. So if, God forbid, we lost a camera or a few within the infrastructure of the cameras themselves and that communication, you still are looking out at that area.
Great. All right. Thank you very much.
Councilman Oliveris.
Thank you, Mayor. Chief, as you continue to work with the county and others on some of the, solutions we're identifying in the warning, can we check to see where we are with other technology related to satellites? I think maybe 5 years ago I saw something on PBS talk about satellite technology and identifying wildfires, where they'd be able to come down and identify a fire as small, which is not really small, as an acre. And I don't know where that technology is. And I think back then they were thinking of maybe a satellite would cover the entire western states. So I don't know where that is, but it sounds like something. I don't know how it has evolved since then, and whether anything's happening.
So again, we have not, the experience I've had and the experience that some of the team is going to have is the scientific research that's taking place in San Diego. I won't necessarily say it's fully satellite driven, but they're doing things like monitoring the amount of moisture in the soil and in the air in particular locations. That feeds into the meteorological team, and it is a meteorological team that is working for San Diego Gas and Electric. They started this again in their response to the 2003-2007. They're using the latest science. That's part of the reason I've asked that group to provide that entree for the recovery and rebuild ad hoc to look at that particular infrastructure. But we are trying to take the latest science into consideration, Councilman.
Thank you, because my understanding is that was specific to fires and to be able to identify wildland fires. So I don't know where that technology is today.
Yeah, I know during our fire, we ended up having a drone fly over our fire, but it took 4 or 5 days to get that up and running, right? So the thought is, how do we get this up way before, so we can use it to our advantage? And so that technology is evolving and it's coming faster than ever. But I will tell you, the Board of Supervisors meeting today, they're talking about technology, and it seems like every 2 to 3 years, there's something different that overtakes what you already have. And infrastructure is very expensive to turn over constantly. So we're trying to make sure that we have a system that makes sense for a long time. At least we can build into that satellite type stuff.
Other questions? Is there a time limit for spending these mitigation funds? Should we receive them? Do they have to be spent in a certain amount of time?
Yes.
3 years.
Okay. And we talk about a lot of federal programs. We've got FEMA, we've got HUD, we've got CBDG. How does this mitigation money differ from the CBDG mitigation money?
So that's a good question. Right now, there's a mitigation pool that exists within CDG-DR that the federal government, it's new to the federal government. I think it was actually created in response to some of the collapsed infrastructure in Puerto Rico that they're still piecing their way through. What I can tell Council is that now that we know a little bit more about the DR money, some of the match that you may be looking to do later on may actually be applicable through DR funds, because the DR funds are not just about unmet need as it relates to housing. They're about protecting the housing so you don't have this kind of recurring event in the future. So there's actually clear language in the register that was published today that said you must improve your infrastructure infrastructure to meet the needs and make protective measures that will address and mitigate future similar disasters. So there is an opportunity for us to utilize some of that other funding to help meet the match needs as it relates to some of these projects as we move forward. We'll be bringing that conversation forward as we go through the entire unmet need conversation in the next 3 months.
Thank you.
Yeah, and the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program is a competitive process. It's a statewide competitive process where the DR funds will be delegated to specific regions, so there is a difference in how the funds get delegated to different organizations. So from the hazard mitigation standpoint, each of these projects will go on a statewide, similar to other grant proposals that we might sit out there, and they will be selected based on merit. We think that by submitting the grants that we've proposed at both the July 1st and the September 4th, we think we've got some great projects. We think they'll be very competitive, but it is competitive. And so the ultimate, but there's no guarantee that will be selected. So as we're asking, as we get into the recommendation on this, we're recommending that the council authorize the submittal of the grants and that they set aside general funds to be able to pay for the local match should all 6 of those grants be approved. I don't know how likely that is. We obviously, from staff standpoint, would hope that they would be. I think it would provide the highest level of protection for the community. It does come at a cost. The number that you see on the screen, as unfortunately, as I mentioned earlier, is inaccurate based on the last-minute change relating to the early notification program. And so the total applications being requested would amount to $5,731,462 in federal funds, with a local match of $1,182,866. So the total application request from FEMA would be $5,731,462. The local match, meaning the request for general fund dollars, would be $1,182,866. So that would be what we're asking council to approve as we move forward with these grant applications. And then as obligations come forward, we would be asked to incorporate those funds into the agreement with FEMA and Cal OES.
And that $1,182,000 would be from the reserves at this point?
At this point, that would be from the reserves, correct. So I was asked by the CFO to, if asked that question, to remind you that we do have $6.6 million in reserves, and that would reduce the reserves to approximately $5.5 million. And with that, I know we've spent a bit of time talking about Tony's project. If you have questions about any of the other projects that are on there in more detail, staff is here if I can't answer the question to provide them a higher level of detail.
Can we also hear briefly about the local match that's needed for the Water Enterprise Fund?
We can. I wasn't prepared to really describe that, but we can, absolutely. So if you look at the table that was provided, so from a local match standpoint, the majority of the local match that's associated on the table comes from the Water Enterprise Fund. It's approximately $9 million. So the matching funds for Project 167, which is the backup generator, is $1.845 million. For Project 196, which is the seismic and water supply improvements, is $2.1 million. And the water treatment facility flood mitigation is roughly $7.4 million. That last one would come from the sub-regional capital fund. The Project 196 would be from the water capital fund, and then Project 167 would be a split between the water and water enterprise fund.
And is that from Water Enterprise Fund reserves? How does that?
I'm going to have to ask either Ben or Joe to come down and answer that question.
Excuse me just one moment. I think I have a list. I just didn't have it broken out. So the funds are broken up into several areas. They include, as Director Nutt mentioned, the water and wastewater enterprise funds, the capital fund, and the sub-regional capital fund. And some of these have already been allocated through the capital improvement program, so they would offset the grant program, but I do not believe those come from water reserves.
It's a mix.
And that is because the projects consist of, the backup generators will be at both water facilities and at wastewater facilities. And then the flood wall is at the treatment plant. So you have some regional funds that will be added or that will come from there.
Okay. The flood wall has been in the capital improvement plan for a while at this point.
That's correct.
Any other questions? Ms. Combs.
Thank you. While you're there, can you just clarify for me why 290 is general fund and not water related? I appreciate that storm drains.
Yeah, so our storm drain program actually is a general funded program. Even though it resides in the Santa Rosa Water Department, it does receive general funds because it's generalized infrastructure. It doesn't have a 218 oriented funding source that supports its entire operation. And
so there is some question about that. We're investigating that right now, but at this time, that is where it sits. But staff is actually both in the city manager's office, the water utility, and in the legal department investigating some recent decisions and seeing where that will ultimately reside. But that's still an open question, and so that's why it's in a general fund.
Thank you.
Any other questions, Council? Does that conclude your presentation?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
I have a couple of cards here. Peter Cherneff.